Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. This is one that I'm sponsoring. I have no sponsor for this one because I believe that strongly in it again. I don't do that very often because I don't like to pay money for stuff, but this is really important. This is a story that it really has affected my sleep. I've had every emotion. I've had encouragement. I've had stress. I've had anger. I've had sleeplessness. I've had hope, lack of hope. I've had it all. This story has really impacted me, because it's a person, and it's also about not being a victim and being a victor and standing up for what's right. And I think people ask me what this podcast is about, and I think I have this tiny platform so that I can bring out these stories. And, I had to weigh, just like everything, and I think we're going to talk about this, the risk and the benefit, because friends told me, Brian, if you touch this stuff, you're going to get banned. You're going to lose your platform. I'm like, if that's true, then I deserve to lose my platform. If I can't speak truth, at least as I see it, I may be incorrect, and I will be incorrect a lot of times. I don't deserve the platform, to be honest with you. And then I see someone like Joe Rogan stepping up. He has a massive platform, and he has massive loss that can come, and he still did it because he believed. So people like that I respect. So I'm not going to cower. I think the important thing is I don't want to offend. I don't want to sway judgments. I don't want to force you one way or another, but I really want to be able to give you information and risks and benefits. That's my job as a physician, is to say, okay, here's the risk, here's the benefit. Now, if we just make everything look perfect and good, that's not good. If we say it's terrible and no one should do it, then that's not good. We have to weigh it for each individual patient. I think that's what we've missed out in medicine. We really have to say, what's your risk of a bad outcome? What's your benefit from getting a procedure, anything we do? And let the patient make an informed consent, an informed decision. And we need to have informed consent to do that. The problem is a lot of times we just don't know all the information. And maybe 10 years from now, we find it and it's too late because we've already made our recommendation. So I think, Brandy McFadden, thank you so much for joining me. It's an honor. Tell people your background, what you've been doing, your life story, and what brought you here. Because, again, your story is one of frustration and hope and all these other things. And I think it just needs to be heard.
So I am a woman that lives with epilepsy. I started a nonprofit called My Epilepsy Story, and we advocate for women and girls living with epilepsy. I was seizure free. I took up seizure medication that caused my son to have autism because he was exposed to that in utero. So the route that I chose to do, instead of suing a pharmaceutical company, I chose to start a nonprofit to make a difference for women and girls across the world.
Yeah, tell people about that, because there was information about this drug that what you weren't privy to, because you may have made a different decision had you have known that.
Right. So the information that I was given about the drug that I was taking, the anti-seizure medication, was pretty much, you could have cleft lip, cleft palate, maybe some heart issues, but it was pretty minimal risk. And they did monitor me throughout my pregnancy for those things. However, later on, after Samuel, I don't know, he was probably about 7, 8 years old, when I was searching for answers for him to, try and figure out what was going on. I came across some information and literature on children that were exposed in utero to this anti-seizure medication. And so they had low verbal IQ points. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I took this medication. So I ended up connecting with many doctors across the country and actually across the world. And so we worked together to bring accurate, unbiased information to patients and to doctors. I mean, every medication comes with a risk, but as a patient and a doctor, we need to know what all those risks are so we can make informed decisions. And maybe some medications may be perfect for some patients and some may not. And for me, women's health had always been a thing that needed to be addressed, because that's what happened to me. If I would have given all the information, would I have taken that medication? I don't know, right? I mean, at the time, I did not know. But so we found out that a lot of information was hidden through the pharmaceutical companies. They were kind of not disclosing as much information. And so I personally had taken the route just to start a nonprofit. I did not want to go suing the pharmaceutical company. Many women have, and they have won, actually. You know, they've settled with them. Well, I should say settled. Let me rephrase that. They've settled. So for me, I needed to do something different. I needed to make something really bad turn into something positive. And Samuel, we always say Samuel is a world changer, and his story is definitely a world changer. He's changed a lot of things for millions of women and girls across the world.
That's amazing. And sometimes, you know, and as a believer, I think sometimes we go through these things, you go, well, what is the use of this? And then you realize that you're going to use that for good. And that's what you've done in your life. And that's an important point, that you're not one to be vindictive and angry, and you have every reason to be. And you go, let me turn this into something good. And I think that's a life lesson for a lot of people listening.
Oh, well, it definitely took me a process. I'm not going to lie. It was definitely why did this happen? You know, you can get our website and see our mosaic video. It really took me some time to get to the point of there is a bigger picture and God has a bigger plan, and we don't get to see that all the time. And so for me, it definitely was a process of, what does this look like? I'm not happy. I'm angry, all these different emotions. And I still struggle with that, you know, as Samuel does not progress maybe in the areas that he needs to. And so I'm like, why did I take that medication, you know? And but then I'm reminded, you know, when I see these other women and girls, of how much has changed for them, you know, since we started this. And there's so much to be changed. And I never imagined this would be what I would do. I mean, honestly, I've had many doctors way back when say, hey, you need to do something for women's health. And I said, no, it's not my thing. And so over a course of time of just sharing our story, being asked to share our story, and they said, you know, you really need to focus on women's health. And I was like, no. And then finally it came around like, okay, this is what I need to do. And I've been able to advocate for patients even outside of the epilepsy community. And so I'll just give you a little background. What our organization does, we take zero pharmaceutical funding. We are independent, and we represent the patient and the medical professionals that selflessly care for those patients. So we advocate for those two voices. And I do other advocacy work outside of that. And I believe firmly that, you know, I do health literacy stuff. I mean, it's just all across the board of patient voice, patient-centeredness, patient-centered care, patient-centered research. So through starting the organization, I've been able to go into other advocacies in the health field, just in different areas outside of epilepsy. And yeah, so I never imagined that's where it would lead. And I surely did not imagine what would happen next, you know.
Yeah, and so your life has been dedicated to helping other people say, look, I don't want this to happen to someone else. I want at least someone to be able to make an informed consent. And as a primary care physician, that's my job also, is say, look, let me weigh the evidence. Let me look at it objectively, not make a decision before I look at it and sit back. And there's a lot of stuff I'm actually a little ashamed in a way, that there's stuff I knew, just inherently I knew was incorrect that was happening, but I didn't have the courage to say anything because I don't want to mess up my reputation, because if I'm wrong, then it messes it, your word is not your word anymore at some point, right? So, you know, for us, I'm very conservative in my view of medicine. I don't start a new medicine right away. I wait and see what happens, because I've been around, I have gray hairs to prove it, but I've been around long enough to see these new drugs coming that were going to be the cure all for everything, and then people died, right? And I was very happy that I waited every time, think, you know, we can wait 4 more months and just see what happens, because I know they say it's great, but they have a vested interest in it being great too, because they did the research, right? And I think that's you raise a few very important points there of saying, hey, look, we're not taking industry money. And I want to be very clear on this, because I've been taken out of context a few times, meaning I'm not anti-pharma. I use continuous glucose monitors all the time. I use meds when they're needed for sure. There's antibiotics that are life-saving. You know, there's vaccinations that I've pushed over the years also, that I believed in, that I thought would risk and benefit, weighing it for each patient. But, you know, you get to a point where you start saying, gosh, there's a lot of biased information. And part of the reason I don't have any pharma, obviously there's a good reason I don't have pharma sponsors, because, you know, then I'm beholden to them. And one of the things that you raise that's really that most people don't understand is a lot of these people that are advocates are taking outside money. So that's going to bias them. As a doctor, I was told I couldn't take a pen from a drug rep because it might make me see that and prescribe the medication. Yet our governing bodies are taking millions and millions of dollars from these same people. And you think that doesn't cloud their judgment.
And also, what's happening now is it's going into the nonprofit industry. And so it's a way to skirt the laws. And so I think that for us personally, what we've decided to do, and I think we're probably the only one in the epilepsy community that does not take pharmaceutical money. We just decided that we needed to have clean, clear information. Again, we're here to represent the patient and the medical community. That's the two voices we hear from. And that's who we represent. And I push that even in my advocacy work outside of that. So it's an interesting way to do things because that's not the norm. But we are very much outside of the box thinkers. And so we believe that we can change things by having clean data. I'm a big, huge advocate for independent research. I will advocate for years on more NIH funding, CDC funding to make sure things are independent, but truly independent, right? We need to make sure that those are independent. And so I think that we have to shake up the medical institution as a whole, and we need to change the way that we are doing healthcare. And that's from pharmaceuticals, from health insurance companies, to hospitals, to, CDC, NIH, FDA. We need to change that institution. And now's the time to do it.
Yeah, and that's a huge problem. And I think one thing people will ask me, like, why aren't more doctors speaking up? Well, a lot of them are working for big institutions. And if you go against the party line in the institution, you lose your job. And a doctor just got fired for speaking his mind. It's tough. I'm independent, so I can be a big mouth sometimes and say stuff that other people can't say. And I think that's maybe God's led me to this platform so that I can have stories like, because other doctors will get fired for having you on. Yeah. With your history. And of course, I taught you beforehand because I had to make sure you're not nutty. That's my responsibility, right? That you have a vendetta, but you are such a reasonable person, and after what you've been through, it's actually shocking to me and refreshing, and also just saying, hey, look, here's the deal. This is what people need to understand. If you have a drug that's off patent, no one's going to pay money to research that. Why would they put their money in that when they have multi-million-dollar drugs that they can make tons of money on? Well, they're going to put their money there because they're a business, and I get it. I don't fault them for that. What I'm saying is, like, look, some of these things we need advocacy for people for drugs that aren't the big money makers. And we've seen things, and I hate to call I actually do like to call things on the carpet because I think we have to have integrity in medicine. The drugs. One drug was just passed for Alzheimer's disease, which is a terrible disease, with every single advisor saying there's no benefit. One said, I'm not sure. 10 out of 11 said no benefit. They said, okay, we approve it. It's like, why do we even have this council that it's like having an attorney that you do everything the opposite of what they say? And so I think voices like yours are saying we need to do independent studies and look at these drugs and look at different treatments and see what the risk and benefit is.
And I think patients' voice has been silenced for so long. And we have to listen to the patient's voice and what the patient wants and what the patient needs. Now, on the flip side of that, right, patients don't always love what they hear, right? So I may not love, like I remember our pediatrician having to have this conversation that our son had autism. I knew something was wrong with him, and I knew he needed help, and I was searching. But the fact when the words were actually spoken, that's not an easy conversation to have, right? So patients and doctors, we need to reinvent the way that we're doing, I say, business together. How are we working together? We need to accept some of the hard conversations on both sides. So doctors need to learn to listen to us. So one of the things that we need to listen to is that patients have a voice, right? And so doctors have a voice. And there are times that we have things that a doctor's telling us that we may not like to hear. For instance, with my son, Samuel, I knew something was wrong and I was searching for answers. But when it came time to say we need to talk about autism with him, that was a really hard thing to hear. So I think we have to have this conversation. We need to redo the way that we're, doing business with each other, because doctors also need to listen to the patients. And patient-reported outcomes is a very important thing to listen to, right? So, but old school medicine says the doctor's always right, and you have to listen to them totally, right? They're the only expert. Really, I had a neurologist years ago tell me, you're the expert. You're the one that lives with epilepsy. I have not had a seizure. And I thought, oh my gosh, I need a new doctor. I mean, like, are you kidding me? Like, where's the expert? So it really kind of started me on the path of really empowering myself to be the expert on what I have, right? And so I think that is where we need to change a lot of things in the healthcare system, but also patients need to be receptive to listen to what their doctor's telling them, even though if it's something really hard to hear, right? So it's got to be this back and forth communication as a team.
Yeah, I think that's critically important, because I've had times, and I know it, and I'm guilty of it on the podcast where I cut people off and I want to get my point, and I want to say what I know, and I want to get my knowledge out there rather than listening. Because a lot of times you listen and you realize it. And I'm telling you, I'm outside the standard care. I'm doing direct primary care. Well, I have an hour with the patient. We talk about there's no one ever talked to me about addiction or food or whatever, or pornography, whatever it is that they're struggling with. And they say, wow, it's just so nice to be, but in the doctor's defense, they're part of a system where they have 7 minutes. You can't talk about all this stuff. It's impossible. But if you have someone with complicated history like you, having an autistic son and having all these, if you have 7 minutes, how much of this can you discuss? And I think that's a problem of the system. We've turned into a factory system where we really can't communicate, because doctors get upset when patients come in with information. I'm like, show me your information. Let me see what you got. And it could be nutty, but it could be great, right? I say, wow, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. So I've learned a ton from my patients. My life changed because of patients. I saw patients having success, and I said, what are you doing? How's it working? Instead of saying, no, that's not good, don't do that, without knowing. And I think that's what I run into a lot, where doctors really don't know on a certain topic. They know that's not good. Instead of saying, well, let me look into it. But when they're working 14-hour days, they don't have time to go home and research it and read all these. They just throw the papers in the garbage and go on with their life. That's the sad truth about medicine.
One of the things that I advocate for when I talk about the doctor's voice or the medical professional's voice, why is the healthcare system set up to have such a short amount of time with a patient, right? Because it's about money. It goes back to money. A lot of this continually goes back to money, whether it's pharmaceutical, hospital industry, whatever the case is. We've become a factory.
It's a system problem. It's a system problem, because in my view, you can come in, I see, I don't ask you what you're eating, say, oh, here's insulin for your diabetes, here's something for your seizures, here's something for your depression, here's something for your anxiety. And so many times if we sit and talk, say, yeah, you're going through a stressful time. Maybe that's causing your back pain. Maybe that's contributing to your TMJ problem, right? Rather than giving you a mouth guard and say, okay, good luck, have fun, and so I think that's the problem, is it's ugly, and it takes time to really invest in the patient and sit down and say, and be an advocate. And I think my job is to be your advocate, say, look, here's the risk, here's the benefit, whether I agree with you or not. There's a lot of patients that I see that say, I'm not taking a statin drug. And I say, well, let's look at the data. Let me try to be as objective as I can. And, one side of the coin says, never take a statin. The other one says, every single person in the world needs to be on it. And so my job is to weigh the evidence and say, okay, what's the risk? What's the benefit? What could possibly happen? What may not happen? And because on both sides, there's always hysteria, right? Of every single person who takes statin gets demented. No, it's not true, right? And not everyone who gets a vaccination has a bad outcome or whatever it is. And so I think you have to weigh and go, look, here's your odds, here's your risk and benefit, right? And I think it's, for me, I think we've dropped the ball as a society and as medicine, when we have to sit back and say, okay, with COVID is a perfect example. What's your risk? What's benefit? What puts you at the most risk of dying? What puts you at the best chance of survival if you do get it? What gives you the best chance of not getting it? And that's our job, right? Not emotions, not what everyone else is saying, what the media says. It's what works and what doesn't work in our experience and our clinical experience that we use. And I think that's one thing, is everyone wants these huge randomized controlled trials. When you're dealing with something that's life-threatening, we have to really trust people who have been working in the intensive care unit for 30 years and they know their stuff and they've helped a lot of people, and listen and at least say, okay, let's not say what you're doing is wrong, you're saving lives, so let's look at that at least and start adjusting. Certain drugs right now, they're starting to do research on, and it's been a year and a half that people have said it works. And that's why it's frustrating as a doc, because for me, the most tragic thing was when they said, my medical society said, wait till the person turns blue, send them to the ER. That's all you can do. Supportive care. I said, well, I don't like that. If I can do anything to help them, I don't want to sit there and do nothing. Right. So I think that's and that's why the hospital doctors were so frustrated, because they were just getting flooded with all these sick people because we didn't do anything. We didn't do our job outpatient wise. And so we all have our role. And I think we're raising some of the issues. And I think understanding that no one's a good person or no one's a bad person completely it's really saying you're in the situation you're in. So I have compassion for doctors. I know how it is because I did it for 18 years. The system will chew you up and spit you out. You get jaded, you get upset, you don't want to hear it, you don't want to, that person's a hassle because they're coming in at your lunchtime and that's the only downtime you had all day. So I want people to understand, it's like, hey, it's not that doctors are bad people and they're evil and they don't want to listen to you. It's just that they're thinking, you want to talk to me about this keto diet for seizure disorder, and I got like 50 patients I got to see today. I really don't want to hear it. That's the reality.
When it's really hard, I have the privilege of I get to know the doctors on the other side. So I've been really fortunate that I've gotten to see personal side of them, their life. They're human, right? They're just like us. And so I think patients, a lot of times we see, oh, there's the doctor, and they think they're arrogant or whatever. I get to see the other side. I get to see the doctor that stays up till 2, 3 in the morning thinking of a patient and how can I help them? Or it's on the weekend and they're taking time away from their family to what can I do? I'm searching for things, for answers for my patients. So that's the side that I get to see, and that's the side I get to share with everyone else, because normally we don't see that side of a doctor.
Yeah, and that's important. And knowing that doctors miss holidays, they've missed birthday parties, they've sacrificed to do what they do, right? And they want to help people, and they're frustrated. I mean, we have the highest suicide rate now because you come in it with your white coat and you want to help the world, and then you realize I'm not helping anyone, and then you're bought out by the system, and now you're just a cog in the wheel, and no one really cares. You leave, and for me at my old practice, I thought, well, if I leave, who's going to take care of these people? Well, there's other doctors who can do it. Maybe not the same style, or maybe not be able to advocate as much, but the problem was I realized in that system I couldn't advocate as much as I wanted to because I was working 14-hour days, and at some point you got to go home and see your wife and kids. You got to have a life, and I'm so happy that you're talking about that part of it because I think that's really important.
One of the things that I always, I do grand rounds presentations, and I always encourage doctors, like, why did you go into medicine? I want you to stop and think before you enter that room, why did you go into medicine? And I think one of the things is that doctors don't realize how much power they have, right? So I always tell patients, you don't realize how much power you have too, because as a patient, if you weren't there, the doctors wouldn't have a job, right? So we need to be patient centeredness, and we need to listen. And as doctors, if you weren't there, the hospital wouldn't have anyone to take to take care of the patients. So we need to work together to change the system. And so doctors do have a lot of power control. I just don't think that they realize how much power and control they have. Because if they started mandating, you know what? No, I will spend, at least 30 minutes with a patient, or whatever their time frame is. If they could get people to collectively band together and say, no, we have to have this, we have to have change in healthcare, and we're going to start that change. And you know what? Our patients are going to demand that we start that change.
Yeah,
So
it's
guess
coming.
what?
Yeah, and that's what's coming. Direct primary care is up and running, and the reason is because of that. They said, look, I didn't want to be hostage to begging the insurance company to get a test. I can get tests done for pennies on the dollar. I get so much more stuff done. And I go, just go down there. Here you go. It's $80. You get your whole lab panel. It's done. People, okay, cool. $80. That's fine. I just won't have dinner. I won't eat a fancy dinner. I'll eat a regular dinner. I'll cook at home. All those kind of things. And it's amazing how we've been so beholden to the insurance model. It really is. Insurance is important. Don't get me wrong. For, if you get hit by a truck, but in the primary care setting, it's like, how much do you pay on primary care? Really, when you look at the numbers, it's nothing. It's
Well,
it's the big emergencies, right?
you see what the doctors get reimbursed, which is just outrageous. I've gotten to know so many doctors that are now in private practice, and to hear how much they get reimbursed for yearly GYN exams, or for yearly, checkups with your neurologist. I mean, it's I had no clue until I was in that circle now to get to see the
Trust
other
me.
side of
Trust me. You're preaching to the choir. I know, because I looked at it, and here's the other devastating part about it is the reality is in the standard of care in HMO medicine, the sicker my patient gets, the more I get paid because they're more complicated. I get paid more per patient. So what's my vested interest in keeping them healthy? And that's why I left that system. I said, I can't handle. I talked to one of the head guys. I go, I can't handle that. I spend hours with my patients trying to keep them from going on insulin and getting dialysis and having heart attacks. And you guys don't value that. And the answer was, the sicker the patient is, the more we get paid by the system. You're actually costing the system money by helping the patient. And I thought, that is, what am I? And like you said, why did you go into medicine? Now, when I come to work, it's like, I know why I went to medicine, because I'm helping every day. People are coming in and their daughter's getting better. Their acne cleared up. They're, things that by changing their lifestyle, they're sleeping more. They're realizing, hey, maybe prayer is going to help me. Maybe collecting rocks helps me. Maybe just finding your place of peace is so critical. And we don't talk about that because we don't have time. You have 7 minutes. You can't talk about that stuff.
Right. So normally what we focus on, so I'll just give you an example for epilepsy. We started a model that we focus on the woman as a whole, right? So it's the whole woman. It's not just her epilepsy. And so that's part of the problem. In medicine, that's not what's happening. Now, I was fortunate that I had a neurologist that I saw when I moved to Nashville, Tennessee. I had to find a new neurologist, the one that said, I'm not the expert, you are. And I thought, I've got to find somebody new. But he was he was really empowering me. But you know what? He also spent the time. to help me educate myself, to make myself better, to help my son. So, I mean, he took the time that he really did not have. And it's interesting because we were giving out a research award a few years back, and we sat there with our first research award, and he was like, did you ever imagine that we would be sitting here, 10 years before, patient, doctor, and then here we are with this nonprofit? I never imagined that. But that tells you, when you spend time with a patient, you can change millions of lives with just one patient, because one patient will change, and it creates a big thing. And even like with women, when you change a woman's life, you actually end up changing the family's life, because usually that woman is the one that's going to be more proactive on healthcare, more proactive on preventative health, more proactive on what they eat, exercise. So really, when you change that, you end up changing generations. So
and societies and community. As a matter of fact, I'm helping some people up in Northern California, a very underserved area, and I'm talking about low carb, and they're coming off their insulin, their medicines. I'm stopping meds, I'm helping them. And this one lady said, can I tell you something? And it was in a group setting. She said, my daughter, she's 14 years old, she's lost 13 pounds just eating better at home and just going for walks with me. And it's easy, and her husband's coming off meds. And you think, wow, they're affecting their community, because other people are going to see that, their acne is clearing up and other things, and they're going to want that lifestyle. Like, you want to take care of yourself. So yeah, it's so great what you're doing, and it's amazing, your history, but I want to bring you up to modern times.
Okay.
Yeah. Tell us what happened to you. Tell us your story now of what recently happened that brought you to my attention.
Yes. So in November of last year, I had COVID. It was pretty rough. I'm not gonna lie. It was a good 2 weeks of not being able to get out of bed, and then it took me about 2 months to fully recover. And I don't even say I fully recovered, but to recover from COVID. I was doing like 4 to 6 miles a day, walking / running. I was trying to get back into running a little bit more, so I was upping that. And I work with many great doctors across the country, and they were so amazing to check on me all the time. How are you doing? Throughout my COVID experience. And we talked about it, and they said, you know what, you need to go ahead and get your COVID vaccine. We're going to wait a little bit. That was kind of a conversation. We were looking to see what the CDC was saying. What would that look like for people that had previously had COVID? So
post-COVID, what were your symptoms, the long-term symptoms that you had afterwards, just so people are clear on that? Did you have fatigue, muscle aches, those kind of things, neurologic stuff? What kind of stuff did you have post-COVID?
So immediately after, you're talking about?
Yeah, from that, during that 2 weeks when you were really sick in bed and miserable, but then after that, were you just dragging, tired, or what? Did you have cough, or what kind of ongoing symptoms did you have?
So I was extremely exhausted. Pretty much, I could not function. I mean, it was really hard. I had a lot of the brain fog, so much so that we normally give out a research award every year, and that is my thing to do, and I could not even participate in that. So the neurologists that I work with were like, this is really bad. I mean, they had seen how it impacted me, and of course they were taking care of COVID patients as well. So it was a really rough 2 months to try and even get back to where I was. And
were you hospitalized for COVID, or was that done at home?
No, I was at home. Pretty much it was told, you're just going to be at home, and that's it. You're just going to have to wait it out. In fact, one of the neurologists that I work with, she sent me a pulse ox via Amazon Prime. I mean, she was like, I need to know what your pulse ox level is, and so she was just very on top of that. I'm thankful. I had really great care from afar from everyone. My personal primary doctor, when I called her, her office, it was pretty much like, you have COVID, just, it is what it is. You know what I mean?
Go to the ER.
Yeah, it wasn't even, there was no follow up. I mean, in fact, yeah, that's another story. So she kind of dropped the ball on a lot of that. And so I kind of got back to myself about 2 months, took about 2.5 months. So decided to finally get my Pfizer vaccine. I'm just going to say what it was. Pfizer vaccine at end of March was my first one, and had some swollen lymph nodes, arm pain. I mean, nothing that I would say was overly like, oh my gosh, there's a problem here.
Yeah, you deal with it. You go, it's a little
they tell
annoyance.
you, hey, yeah, this is fine. You expect these things, and that's it. And so about 2-3 days, I was back to myself. Went in for my second vaccination on April 16th. Went in that morning, 8 a.m., was fine. I thought, oh, it's going to be a great weekend. It was a Friday. It's going to be a beautiful weekend. So I went to the store, got some flowers to plant. You know, we were going to have some family time. And a few hours later, I felt like my legs were a little kind of jello-y almost. And I told my husband, I'm not going to go work out today. And I had a call around 3:00 with a neurologist that I work with. And I said, man, my neck is hurting. It was in my left side. My neck was hurting. And we kind of laughed and we said, oh, you're going to get the flu-like symptoms because you already had COVID. And so I was like, oh my gosh, okay, great. And the neck pain kept getting worse and worse. And I ended up, could not sleep that well that night. Saturday morning, I woke up in excruciating pain. I mean, it just hurt so bad. And honestly, I kind of thought, oh, I pulled a muscle. I mean, really, that's kind of what I was attributing it to. I really didn't think vaccine, you know, wasn't my, I guess, first thing on my radar. So it was getting worse and worse. And my husband was like, I think you need to go to the hospital. And I was like, no, I'm fine. It's probably a pulled muscle, put some heat on it, just trying to. And then all of a sudden I thought my neck kept pulling and it was starting to happen about every minute. And I thought, oh my gosh, this vaccine has compazine in it because I'm allergic to compazine. And so I thought, oh my gosh, got compazine in it. Take me to the emergency room. So we left the house, left our 3 children here with me screaming in excruciating pain. My husband having to pretty much help. I mean, he was not carrying me, but pretty much assisting me to the car at this point. And we rushed down to the hospital. And you could see a split immediately when I said, you know, my husband was like, she's having a vaccine reaction. I said, I kept begging for Benadryl because I'm thinking, there's a compazine or something, a phenothiazine in this vaccine. And it pretty much was a split in the hospital, like it's vaccine or no, it's got to be something else. And I've never seen anything like this in my entire life. I just never, it was so controversial. So everybody was, pretty much just disagreeing with each other, arguing it's got to be this. We've got to report it to VAERS. No, we don't need to. It's just a pulled muscle. I mean, it was just, oh, wait, maybe she's having a seizure. And I'm like, I'm not having a seizure. This is not, my neurologist actually is in the DC area. He called the emergency room because we called him and he's like, she's not having a seizure. This is not a seizure. And
you were awake and coherent the whole time.
I was.
Which would argue against a seizure.
Yeah, and he's like, this is not the type of epilepsy she has. He's trying to, because I have tonic-clonic, grand mal, whatever you want to call them, seizures. And I haven't had one in a long time. So this was not even the same thing. And so it became a battle in the emergency room, not only with some of the doctors, but even amongst themselves, which was really shocking to us. And I ended up,
and they were arguing in front of you, basically. Like you're seeing them like debating it. Yeah, it's a hard thing because you don't want to chalk everything up to vaccination or certain meds and all that stuff. But had you have received a new blood pressure medicine 3 hours, for darn well sure they'd say there's a reaction to the blood pressure medication. So I think there's some cognitive dissonance here when we don't want it to be. And I'm telling you, I know I'm privy to at least 4 cases where new onset seizures in a kid, 18, 22, fit, active. New onset in the ER, they said this is not, it was 3 hours after the vaccination. There's another one that was the next day. There was another one who with mental incompetence, like psychosis. And you see it and they said, no, it's not from that, something else, but they never found an answer, but they said, no, it's something, and they never reported it. As far as I know, that they weren't my direct patients. And I have seen a lot of the, swollen lymph nodes, aching, pain, all those things. You go, okay, deal with it. And a vast majority of my patients had no bad outcomes. I just want to be clear on that had the vaccination. So I'm not saying everyone gets these things, but it is happening and we're seeing it.
Right. And I think that's the important thing, right? We need to have first of all, I'm a big person that I think that there needs to be mandatory reporting. I think that if we require doctors to mandatory report any possible reactions or anything that they're seeing in patients 60 days from having a vaccination, guess what? We solve this problem because you know why? It takes the pressure off the doctors and they go, I have to mandatory report this. I could lose my license. And so when you have mandatory reporting, then you're allowed to go ahead and shift that. Then we can shift through the data and look at that to see what it's showing. But when we don't have mandatory reporting, it creates a problem.
That's a critically important point, right? Mandatory reporting. if I suspect you're being abused by your husband, I have to mandate, I have to report that, whether I want to or not, whether it causes a problem. And it's more paperwork for the doctors who are already over busy. So they don't want to do it too. They say, okay, it's not that. I don't want to deal with this. So I think that's an important thing. And I think that's, teachers are mandatory reporters if they suspect abuse. And this is something when you say, okay, let me take, I don't know. Some of these things I say, I don't know. I mean, I'm telling you, some of the stuff I've seen that was not reported is staggering to me, because there's stuff that can happen later on. But I think our job is not necessarily to make the diagnosis, to say, hey, look, this is a weird thing. It's temporally related. And I'll tell you that the reason this is frustrating, that this isn't mandatorily reported, at least, and then say, no, this has nothing to do with it, fine, right? But if you see, 500,000 people having seizures after getting it, then you say, well, there must be something to this, right? But just looking back at other illnesses, for instance, for me, it's been a frustration with COVID, and obviously, as you will attest, it's a real thing, and no one's saying it's not real. Obviously, you were sick and you had all these things going on, but one of the things is that everyone who tested positive for COVID, if they had a car accident and died, that was a COVID death. That's what I mean. It was misclassified. So at least report it, and then I say, no, this really isn't that, right? For instance, I'll tell you, as a doc, I could check everyone for herpes, and everyone who dies say, well, it's herpes related. Well, it wasn't. They didn't die from that disease process. That just happened to be there at the time of death. And I think that's a huge distinction that we've missed, and it's fed into some of our fears.
I think we need to, I personally think, just seeing it from the medical professionals viewpoint, I think we need to take the pressure off of the doctors, and we need to say, look, this is mandatory. We mandate a lot of stuff, right? So we're about to mandate vaccinations, right? On a lot of different things. So if we have mandatory vaccinations, we need to have mandatory reporting. And I think that gives us clear data to look at, to find out. And honestly, let's just be honest, we're in the largest clinical trial in history. So we need to acknowledge that, and we need to look at that. I mean, it's going to take us about 3 to 5 years probably to see what really is going on here. When you compile all the data, look through it, sift through it, it's going to be a little bit of time. I think that, yes, not everything is vaccine related or medication related, right? We need to be really clear about, and I also want to be clear, I did not have a seizure. So I want to make sure I make that. I know that was one of the things that they had initially thought.
No, they diagnosed you with Todd's paralysis, right?
They did not. No, I do not have Todd's paralysis.
But they were saying like that was part of their discussion, is that this could be.
Actually, no, it was other people online have been like, oh,
okay,
so it's got to be Todd's paralysis. No, it's not.
And I think that's an important, let me just jump in here just for a second. That's an important distinction. So all these people, when your story came out, that's why I wanted you on, because I saw how people, this is not a real person. This is fake. This is all, I mean, obviously talking to you, you're a real person. You look pretty real to me. That's what I wanted to see on a video, to make sure you weren't a robot or something, because people accuse you of being a robot. They say you're just trying to, sue the insurance company and all these kind of things. And I think, and they, really it's the same thing. I look at faith, like something happens, I go, this is a miracle. Look, listen to this story. And then people go, well, it was just this. And they explain it away rather than saying, well, the most likely thing is I'm driving and I get into a car accident, and the next day I notice I have a big, huge scratch on the side of my car. It's like, probably that was from the accident. I don't say, well, maybe someone came in the middle of the night and scrubbed it. You look at you look at the big picture and go, yeah, that probably happened there, right? I mean, you can walk one time and then now the next day you don't walk. You say, well, maybe we have to look at this. And I think you're raising these valid points.
So our experience, honestly, they kind of got my neck to calm down at the emergency room. They said, let's keep you overnight. And I said, no, I just want to go home. And actually, I'm really thankful, because one of the emergency room doctors said, I really want to watch you. He said, I'll let you go home. But he's like, I really, really would prefer. And he kept pressing for us to stay. And I'm glad we did, because within probably, that was on Saturday night. By Sunday night, sometime between Sunday night and Monday morning, I could not move my arms or legs. And I told my husband in the middle of the night, I'm like, I can't move. I can't move my arms, or like, get somebody. And looking back, from the time that I entered the emergency room to the first, 24 hours at the hospital, I actually was probably slowly being paralyzed. I wasn't able to really move around. They were giving me my medicine, and I kept saying, I can't. They had started giving me everything by mouth at that point. And I said, I can't put it in my mouth. And so they're like, oh, that's okay. And they would just pop the pills in my mouth and give me a cup of water with the straw. And I would have to sit there and go swallow, swallow, swallow in my brain. And so honestly, it's a miracle I didn't choke on something. I mean, it was
Did you have
so.
neuroimaging already? They MRI'd your neck and brain and all that, or?
Initially in the emergency room, they did a CT scan and they had ordered an MRI at that point, and I had not had it. And so I was going in for my MRI, and
And you had no trauma, nothing else unusual before this. You were fine that day.
totally fine. Yeah.
Okay. I'm a doctor. I have to ask questions. That's what we do.
Totally, yes.
We don't listen very well. We just talk.
No, and I think that's I just kept saying something happened with this vaccine. I honestly kept saying, is there compazine in it? Right. That was my thing. There's got to be compazine. And they have sworn up and down there's not compazine in this vaccine. And so then it came into when obviously I had the paralysis, and then eventually that turned to weakness, because once I was able to move somewhat, they changed that to weakness. I in the hospital, after kind of really fighting, my questions were, have you called VAERS? Have you called Pfizer? And have you called Cleveland Clinic? Because there was another woman that was in the hospital a similar time as I was, and she was having the same thing. And what was interesting is that they did not want to contact Cleveland Clinic. And to me, that I was just floored. I just couldn't understand, why wouldn't you want, you're a teaching hospital, they're a teaching hospital. I mean, Vanderbilt's teaching, they're teaching. Why would you not want to contact this other hospital? And
well, maybe ironically, or maybe it's because Cleveland Clinic did a study saying, hey, post infection, vaccination is not beneficial. So what their study showed at Cleveland Clinic. So maybe they were saying, hey, they should have checked antibodies, maybe, and I don't know. And that's another huge topic, obviously, we could talk about, because that's a huge issue for me is testing antibody titers and seeing if or T-cell immunity, these kind of things that we really have an obligation to our patients, because a ton of people have been infected already. And if the risk is very exceedingly low, we have to look at the risk and benefit again. So we bring up an informed consent, and that is not being done.
Well, it's interesting because when I saw my primary care, right, back in February, before I even had my vaccination, I asked for an antibodies test, because one of the doctors that I work with said, hey, I wonder what your antibodies are. Just curious, and I was like, what are you talking about? And so I asked my primary care. We were doing a full blood panel after my COVID, and she said, we don't need that. And I said, well, no, I just want to go ahead and have it. And she did my blood test, but she did not do my antibodies test. So when I was at Vanderbilt, I kept asking for antibodies. Like, what are my antibodies? And they would not test my antibodies. They wouldn't tell me what they were. And so I'm like, are you testing? They're like, it doesn't really matter, So
So at this point, you were flying the ointment for sure.
Oh, yes. I pretty much was like, shut up and get out. I mean, that's really what it was. I mean, we had a doctor say, this cannot make the news. So
why do you think the doctor would say that?
Well, I think it, because I mean, it causes question, right? When you talk about somebody having a reaction to a vaccination, that's not the story they want to get out, right? We want to say, because right now they're saying it's perfectly safe and you're fine. It's a safe vaccine, and I will give them, for majority of the people, yes, it is a safe vaccine, right? As of what we know right now. And so I think that, but when you don't tell the whole story, then we've got a problem. Kind of leads me back to way back when, right? When I was talking about that seizure medication that I took when I was pregnant. If we don't have all the information, we can't make a decision. And honestly, we're in a clinical trial. So in a clinical trial, you're supposed to have everything out there, right? We should be reporting everything. So I think that, when they said this can't make the news, they left the room, and I was like, give me my phone. And so that was it.
It did make the news.
It did make the news, and it made the news quite a bit. And I think that my thing is, everybody wanted to put me in a box. You have to be either anti-vaccine or pro-vaccine, and I'm not going in a box.
I love that. And that's what I love about you too, is like, hey, I'm not going in a box. I'm not saying, hey, no one can get the vaccines, or every single person needs. I said, look, we have to weigh the risks and and when I say that, people get upset, but it's like, look, my patient in front of me, I was like, okay, you're an 18-year-old kid. Is your risk different than a 92-year-old diabetic who's obese? Of course it is. There's no doubt about it. My job partially as a primary care is say, how do I put you at the best chance of surviving this thing? And then I have to look at the actual numbers, say, what's your chance of survival if you get this thing? What's your chance of having a bad outcome from the vaccination? And that's our job. Here's the problem. I don't know what to tell people. I don't know. I cannot give true informed consent, because people say, well, doctor, are there any long-term problems? I don't know. I really don't know. Why? Because we don't have long-term data. You can't buy a car and say, will this car be good in 10 years? I don't know. It should be. It's a Lexus, should be good, but you may get a lemon. I don't know. And it's the same thing. And I think in the defense of doctors, I think the problem where if someone comes to me and says, okay, doctor, what do you think, I should have car insurance or not? I say, well, it depends. If you never get pulled over, you never get into an accident, you probably don't need it. But if you get into an accident next week, you're going to come and yell at me, right? So I'm like, look, pretend like you're going to get into an accident. That's the law, and you want to follow the law, and you want to do what's right, right? So I think these things, when someone comes back to me in 10 years, you said I need health, you said I need car insurance, I never used it. It's like, well, you got lucky, right? So whatever. I think it's one of those things we can't predict the future, and I'm telling you, we don't know. That's the honest answer.
Well, one of the things my husband asked the doctor, he goes, so basically what you're telling me is that this is like a car recall. We have to have enough people have a problem. And she said, yes, it's like a car recall. And I was just like, so my thing is, okay, it is what it is. I mean, I took the vaccine, right? For me personally, I'm a women's health advocate. Why is the CDC saying more women are reporting reactions to all 3 vaccines? It's just across the board. We've glossed over that. And there are varying degrees of reactions. So from a women's health perspective, why are we not addressing women's health in this? Maybe do women only need one dose? Maybe what is it? We need to look at this. I mean,
does the first dose give you enough protection without the less risk of the second dose? Possibly. If you had just stuck with the first dose, who knows what happened? Who knows? And I will tell you, since you already had COVID, your chance of getting it again were near zero. Right. And that's the frustrating thing. But no one said, hey, here's the I'm telling you, I take care of a lot of doctors and nurses, and they go, no one really gave me, they just said, line up and here's your shot. They never said, here's what could happen. And I think that's my problem more so than anything, because I don't know the answers. I'm not an expert in this area, but I do study history. And I looked at the swine flu vaccination and some of the problems that they had with people had major stuff like you had. Other vaccinations have caused other problems. And there's other vaccinations who've saved millions of people from dying of bad stuff, right? Like polio vaccination, all those kind of things are definitely, there's benefit. So I think that's but I think the problem is if there is a problem, we have to be able to look at that. Just like anything, your best friend, if they have a problem, you have to look and go, yeah, they have a tendency to lie, or they have a tendency to do this, and be aware of that. So you want to be aware, even if it's not that all people, like putting you in a box is not the right thing to say, okay, now you're our new advocate anti-vaxxer, or you're our new advocate, it's really, really hard. And a lot of people fall into that category.
I think it makes people uncomfortable, right? Because I'm not in a box, and that people don't know what to do with that. So my thing is we need balance. We need balance in medicine. We need balance in our lives right now, honestly, with everything that's going on. We need some balance, and we have lost balance in our country. And we need to get back to some balance here. We need to have some honest conversations. If there is a risk, which we know there's some sort of risk with paralysis or weakness, because I keep saying, okay, let's look how many people have had weakness or paralysis. We need to have that added to a possible side effect, and then we need to know how to treat these people. Because I mean, honestly, I was in the hospital for 12 days and then had to go to inpatient rehab for 13 more days, and I'm still doing outpatient rehab for OT and PT. So I think we need to know, what do we have to do when we see this, acknowledge it, and let's help the patient. Because if you're asking everyone to take a vaccine to help the community, right? What are we going to do to help people when they do have a reaction? I will tell you this also, when you talk about the antibodies, I did have my antibodies tested. My antibodies 2 months out after having this vaccine is greater than 2,500. So when you, yes, greater.
And that says something, I mean, for me, because I know, looking at the data, once you get vaccinated, your antibody titers drop. Like it does, it just does. And so, and you may have seen that people who are vaccinated who haven't had COVID, they can't donate antibodies to help fight COVID for people who get sick, right? So people who've had COVID can do that. So I think that's really true. That's not conspiracy theory. That's reported. So I think it's those kind of things, and you look, it's like, my gosh, with your antibodies being that high, and this is my concern as a doctor. Look, if someone had, and I'm telling you, I've looked at outcomes on these young doctors who've died of the vaccination, and it generally what I've seen, and I think there's a lot that we don't know, is that they were sick within a month or two of getting the vaccination. And if you get a hyperimmune response, then you could be in big trouble with the inflammatory response and the spike proteins and all that. So who knows if that's what happened with you, or whether it was some agent in there, but you clearly had an event afterwards. And I think, oh God, please.
We need to screen before we vaccine. I mean, that's a very simple test, right? I mean, we are not at this point, we have the opportunity to do that, right? We need to make sure that we take a pause for a moment. Everyone needs to breathe. And I think we need to have some balance. We need to have some honest conversation. This is not about politics. I'll tell you, when I was in the hospital, we had people that are Republican and Democrat show up to help our family. It did not matter which political party they were in. Healthcare has now become political, and it needs to stop. And
amen. That's an amen for, I mean, that's exactly true. Because if you talk on certain subjects, they'll say, oh, you're liberal, you're a conservative. It's like, you know what? I'll tell you, liberal, conservative, I think we all agree is that if we can save lives as doctors, we're going to do that. And I think that is the problem. Is there's a lot of people listening right now who've already made up their mind. No matter what we say, they've made up their mind. And my job is this, and your job is to sit back and go, okay, let me reassess this situation, right? Let me change gears. And that's what our leaders didn't do. They didn't change gears and go, wait a minute, here's what the data is showing, guys. Maybe we need to check, not suppress the data. Let's all look at it. Let's publicly talk. And I think that is the hugest thing that has concerned me, is people took a strong stand. They could have been wrong, but they got blackballed. They got fired from their jobs, and they had a huge, and other doctors like myself saw that and go, okay, I'm not going to say too much because there's ramifications of that. And I think a good, decent person says, let's be balanced. Let's not just pigeonhole ourselves and say, okay, all of this are bad, or all. And I think in society, we're saying that all of this race is bad. All of this is bad. It's not. There's good and bad in everything. I have doctors that I love, and there's doctors I can't stand. There's Christians who bother me, and there's Christians that I love, right? There's Muslims that are my best friend. So it's like, okay, let's look at the person. We can't divide. We can't cause this suppress. For you, your story, you're telling your story. And what happened on Facebook to you, for instance?
so, yeah, so I shared my story, and Facebook censored it. I got a message saying that it violated their community standards and something about spam. And it was a news article of,
yeah, spam, or you're selling something. It's like, what am I selling? And what, I mean, what is false about me not being able, and it was, I saw the that's why I reached out to you. I saw the news. I'm like, holy cow. Like, the reason I wanted to reach out to you first was not on the vax issue. It's like, what do you do when you're paralyzed? You wake up paralyzed one morning. Like, where do you go? Where's your brain go? Where do you, and then the other thing was your determination, your motivation. Everyone was inspired that worked with you, that you wanted to get better and that you're working hard to get better. Going through the rehab, putting in the work, and I think in weight loss and diabetes, all those things, someone who puts in the work, I love that rocky spirit that you have. You're not a victim. You're not a victim. You were a victim, but you said, look, I'm going to turn this into something good, just like you did with the seizure disorder.
Yeah, I think that when you, it was hard, when you're not able to move, you don't see your children pretty much for 25 days. You start to question, you ask why, why did this happen? When my son is looking at me, they weren't allowed to come to the hospital. So my husband would put me in a wheelchair, wheel me out to the courtyard, and our youngest would touch my legs and my feet and say, are you ever going to walk again? And so for us, that was just even more heart-wrenching to watch our children have their mother go from this to that. And I guess it was about a week or two ago, I heard our daughter kind of screaming in the kitchen, and I heard there was some sort of rumble in there. And so I kind of hobbled in there to see what was going on. And I stood in kind of on the outdoor kind of door frame, and I heard our youngest, David, Hannah Kate, was like, I'm so tired. I'm tired. I don't want any more of this to happen to our family. And he put his arm around her and said, don't you think that maybe God chose this because he knew mommy wasn't going to stop talking about women's health? And so, wow. It was kind of and I've had a couple of people that I know that are like, Brandy, you're the person to talk about women's health. And I'll be quite honest, my husband and I, when we were at the rehabilitation hospital, we kind of came to grips with where we were and how bad it was. I'm like, I'm tired. I'm honestly tired. It took me 10 years in that space to talk about women's health and epilepsy. And now it's vogue, right? It's the thing to talk about: pregnancy, women's health. What are we giving these women? And I thought, I can't do this. I'm just tired. And I really did have a couple of days where I was just like, I'm done. I don't want this. What does this look like? I was angry. I was angry at the medical community. I was angry that I wanted something positive to come from this, but nothing's appeared to be coming positive other than the fact that I was just, trying to walk again. And so it was really, when you go through hard times, it's hard to be in that valley, right? And to see, but I know, and we've taught our children that, God does have a bigger picture and he has a bigger plan for us. We don't know what that looks like. I will tell you that I really believe that starting the nonprofit years ago has really prepped me to go through this now. I would have never imagined that. Honestly, I was getting very comfortable in my nonprofit space with epilepsy. It was easy. You know, we kind of had our little thing and that's what we did and we talked about it. But now I feel like this is I feel like we're David and Goliath, right? We're taking on this huge giant, and the giant is the healthcare system, right? Because to me, it's not just about a vaccine or a medication. It's something bigger.
It's a systemic problem. Yeah, it's a systemic problem. And I think that's it. Sometimes I've looked at it and I'm like, you know, because I've come from the low carb perspective. I've seen people come off insulin. I've seen great things happen. And people say, that's not true. I'm pretty sure I'm seeing that. I'm pretty sure that they're not filling those meds anymore. So, you know, when you see it and people say that can't be. And when, you know, I have a patient that I just started, she's a hospice nurse, right? This touches me because I know exactly what she's saying. She says 95% of the people she's seeing on hospice are diabetes complications, amputations, kidney failure, blindness, you know, wound care and all this. And she has diabetes that's been out of control. Her doctor said, don't even try to come off insulin. You never can. Like, what kind of message are we sending to people? Yeah, you can. It's just going to take some work and effort. And if you're bought in like you are, like when people say maybe you won't walk again, you don't know. And the fear that comes with that. And, you know, being able to say, and I know I saw the news clip where they said, you know, you said, hey, whenever you're free, come over here and I'll work with you. I want to get better. And you showed that drive. And if I have a patient like that, man, it makes my job so much fun.
I will tell you though, it was a journey to get there. I remember my physical therapist that you saw in the video. She said, I need you to wrap your brain around where you are. And I said, I'm going to walk out of here with nothing. And they were like, there's no way, you know, kind of thing. And so I remember a day into it, I really hit bottom. I hit rock bottom for me. And she gave me that permission pretty much to say, I need you to wrap your brain around where you are. And I had a friend call and they said, you sound really, really sad, Brandy. You know, maybe you should get some medicine. Maybe they'll, you know.
Yeah, it's your mood. You're depressed. That's all, right?
Right. You know, yeah. So maybe you should get some medicine because this will help you kind of, you know, you're really sad. And I said, you know what? I want to feel every ounce of this, the good and the bad. And I said, because you know what? When I get on the other side, I'm going to fight like hell. And that's really what I believe. And I think that I had to take the good and the bad that came with it, every good thing, bad thing, because I learned a lot in each process of that. So
that's a huge thing as a society. You can't scrub the bad parts. As a human being, you can't look back and say, look, I had a terrible childhood. You know, I mean, sometimes we have to go back and we have to deal with that, and we draw strength. And this is where faith went. You know what? You don't know the origins of this podcast, but the Lord had on my heart for a long time because I have another podcast that's really popular called Low Carb MD, but no one wanted to hear about faith stuff. So a lot of the people said, hey, I turned to my faith, and people, we don't want to hear that part of it. So I said, I'll start another podcast and we'll talk about those things, because when everything hits, like when you hit your bottom, you know, and you may have a different story, but a lot of people say, okay, God, I need help here. I can't walk. I can't hug my kids. I'm having a bad outcome. I don't know if this is permanent. I don't know if it's going to get better. And it's like, okay, I'm going to need, like, that's when we turn to God, not when everything's going great. You don't think about it. I don't think about it. I go, okay, everything's great. I don't need you. I'm good. I'm rolling along. So how was that? How did your faith play into all this stuff? Was that a huge thing, or was it like, I'm just in survival mode?
I think initially I was in survival mode, honestly, when I was at the hospital, because I was battling and I was having to fight. I was having to be the patient advocate for myself. And I just, you know, that's what I do on the outside, but now to have to do it for myself was just very, you know, just overwhelming. So I think when I got into, you know, our pastor came up to see us and stuff like that, but still I was like, okay, wait, great, you know, whatever.
And were you mad at God, saying, God, why did you let this happen? Or was it not even like a thought in your mind?
Yes, it was. And I think that I probably was not ready to have that conversation. I mean, you know, I was,
let me cool down, take a breath.
Yeah. And I'm like, this can't be happening, you know, and I think I was so focused on like, what am I going to do with these doctors? How are we going to change this? Like, what can I do? How do I get out of here? You know, honestly, I mean, what's going to make this better? So I was angry. I was angry that I couldn't see my children. I was angry with so many different things. When I got to the inpatient rehab, I think though, that was my more of coming to my bottom of like, why? And when I joke with my husband and I'm always like, you don't cry, you know, I'm like, we always have this like joke and I'm like, you never cry. Why don't you ever cry? And blah, blah, blah. And I remember he came up to the inpatient rehab. He had gone home to get some stuff and he came in and he started crying. And he said, I'm so tired. I just can't see you like this anymore. And he's like, he goes, you fought for women's health for 10 years. And then now you're still fighting for women's health. Because all I kept saying was like, hey, let's talk about women's, let's change this. And to see him even more so, I mean, he cried at the hospital, but this was more of an, I mean, like serious cry. And so I think we just had that moment of just hitting rock bottom together of like, God, we need you. Like, I don't know what to do. We don't know what to do other than this is where we are. And I know you have a bigger picture and plan. And it was interesting because there was a doctor that I know, and she's pretty prominent. And she said, you know, Brandy, God doesn't make things happen for, you know, he makes them happen for a reason. He caught, you know, he allows things to happen. And she said, you know, one of the conversations is that they don't know what to do with you. You won't take their pharmaceutical money and you won't shut up. And she said, you know, I know that God chose the right person because you're not going to be quiet and you're not going to cave. And honestly, I cried and I said, I can't do this. I really can't. And so I think that in that quiet time that I had, I think I turned on the television one time because they were doing a follow-up interview and we were watching it. And other than that, I had a clock ticking in my room and you could just hear the clock ticking. And so I remember being so angry, like hearing the clock tick. I'm like, who puts a clock ticking in a room where somebody can't get up and move, right? I mean, like that's the worst case thing that you could do to somebody. But as that clock ticked, that was really kind of it was angry, like my life is ticking away, you know, so many different things. But then I was like, as it ticked, I learned a lot from that silence, right? And what did I need to learn from that? What was I supposed to be learning in this time? And I will tell you, one of the things is that, you know, the people that came in and cleaned my floors, to the people that brought me my food, the conversations that we had, and they're like, I don't understand this. And how are you holding it together? You know what I mean? That was their kind of thing. And I just said, you know what? I know that God has a bigger plan and I don't know what it is. And I know I have a lot of people praying. So I think there was a lot of that conversation. Of course, we're talking a lot about women's health as well, but there were so many different integral parts of our experience, especially at that Stallworth is where I went, that rehab facility, that I can tell you I would not have changed for $1 million. I mean, and so I think that in those quiet moments, God allows things and allows people to come into your life to see the bigger picture. And so through that, I mean, there's so many other things I could tell you, like even larger, right, as we have continued on this, but I know that God has prepared us for, you know, such a time as this, right? And so he prepares us for the next phase, and it may not be the phase that you want and the journey that you want, but you know, it's a journey.
Jesus will tell you that, right? It's like, hey man, I wouldn't have chose this path. This is not the best way to, and you knowing these things. And I think for a lot of us that, you know, there's stuff on my path. It's like, I wouldn't have chosen this. For me, I usually know it's a God thing when I say don't want to, and I like this podcast, I fought forever. And I really feel like this episode is why I did the podcast. Really, this is why, because you're talking about your faith, you're talking about determination, you're talking about system that needs to be changed, all these things. That's what Jesus came and did. He flipped over tables sometimes, you know, and we want to turn the other cheek. And it's so weird that what came into my mind when I was unlocking my door to come in here today was, you know, don't mistake my kindness for weakness, right? And I think a lot of us have been kind and decent, and we want to just turn the other cheek. And at some point you say, look, I'm not going to be the reason you caught my attention too is you kept reposting. Here's my story. And it kept getting suppressed. And here's my story. And you're a tyrant, right? You're not going to give up. So, and I think your voice will be heard. And I think God is giving you a platform. I think you go through these things in your strength, and you learned a lot about yourself in this, because a lot of us say that. I remember seeing patients. I'm like, man, if I was in that situation, I don't know if I can deal with that, right? Like being burned over your body, all those things. But people do. We are so much more resilient than we think. And that's what, as a doctor, I love that, because I see people that you think they have, as I see it, as God sees us, I think, is that I see that person when they come in, they're 450 pounds and they have no hope. It's like, once they see hope and once they know they can do it, and once you empower them, they don't need me anymore. They get it, and they know they can do it. And someone like you says, look, because there's someone else, I guarantee you, is going to be sitting in a hospital bed paralyzed, and they're going to hear your story. And they're going to say, you know what, she did it, you know, and there's so many people I've interviewed on this podcast. The same thing is like their story speaks to people because they go, look, it happened to me and here's what I did. Right.
So many women that we've, or not even just women, just people in general that we've, especially women though, that we have seen the video and said, oh my gosh, I was in the hospital bed and I saw your story. Somebody sent it to me. And so for me, I'm like, okay, God, what are we supposed to do with this? Right. And so for me, it's women demanding change as a whole, right? We demand change in this healthcare institution. And so again, it's not about vaccines, not vaccinated, you know, medications. It's the healthcare institution. And what am I supposed to do with that? Because I can talk about medications, I can talk about vaccines. I never imagined that I would be talking about vaccines. I have amazing doctors that I work with all across the country and actually across the world. There's several that I work with in other countries. And I know that there needs to be change. I know that we have to do this. I know that honestly, men need to join with us to do this as well, because you know what, even if you're not married, you had a mom, everybody had a mother. So men need to, you know, join with us and say, we demand more for these women.
And daughters and you know, daughters, aunts and uncles, you know, I mean, all these, we owe it to each other. We owe each other to speak the truth, even when it's not convenient, even if it goes against the narrative. I think it's a hard thing to speak. Speaking truth, I find, is very difficult. I mean, I don't find it difficult, but I see there's consequences to that because people don't want to hear it and they'll attack you personally. They'll say, well, 5 years ago you said this or whatever. And I think that shows that your argument is correct because they can't argue the argument. Your argument of what you went through, and you're not passing judgment. You're not, you know, you're saying, look, people need to know and hear your story, and suppressing that is evil, in my opinion. It's evil because people need to know. People need to at least step back and say, was there something to this or not? And I'll tell you, I've seen stuff that I said, I think this is probably vaccine related, medication related, whatever related. And we have a responsibility to say, I'm seeing this. I've had good friends attack me, like say, Brian, like based, not attacking, but questioning me, saying, hey, how do I know this really? Are you making this up? I'm not making it up. I mean, I'm just telling you privately, I'm not doing this publicly. I'm just telling you, here's what I've seen. And here's what's coming out now. And things are dripping out. And you see, and you go, okay, I have a responsibility. Whether I like it or not, we have a responsibility, as do you.
I will tell you that my chart does say all symptoms are temporarily due to COVID vaccine, which has been reported to VAERS or I don't know, whatever, blah, 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 you know. So I think that is an important thing to add. And again, I think that I don't want to be in a box, right? I mean, my husband got vaccinated. I got vaccinated. I had COVID. I can tell you both sides of it. I work with doctors. There's a doctor I work in India. And, you know, I know COVID is bad. I also know that I had COVID. Again, we talk about, do women need as many doses? If I had COVID, should I be, you know, my antibodies obviously were so high even after that. So, I mean, there's so many different things. And I think having the conversation is not bad. When you take politics out of healthcare, you actually can have medical conversations, healthcare conversations, science-based, right? Doctors, that's what they do. We have these conversations. You guys have these conversations of, okay, I've seen this, I've seen that. And I'm telling you, in 3 to 5 years from now, you will hear them talking about women's health in this area. This is what happens. And I think that we create things based upon men and we just delve it out to women and then we figure them out later on. And so my big thing is that first of all, women's health, you know, obviously I'm passionate about that, but then I think we need to have the conversations about, you know, screening before you get a vaccine, you know, these different things. I mean, we have new variants coming along. What does that look like? And I think just being honest and, you know, honestly, there was a doctor that worked with me when I was an inpatient. And he was a resident, and I love working with residents because you know what? They are like sponges. Some of them can be arrogant, but you can still treat them. I mean, there's just so many different dynamics with residents, right? And this resident, I would ask him a question and he'd go, you know what? I really just don't know. And he said, we're learning with you. And I thought, you know what? I love that.
That's a good doctor. That's a good doctor. I don't know. Let me look into this. If you know everything, you're the most dangerous doctor on earth, right? And if you're not willing to change what you're doing and say, oh, I have new evidence. in faith, whatever it is. I think that is so important for you to sit back and not be afraid. And I'll tell you, I was thinking about it because there's a guy I'm more conservative, he's more liberal. We were 100% in agreement on a lot of stuff. It's not political. It's not a political thing. It's more saying, look, do the right thing for your society, for your people. When you're out hiking or when you're really sick in 9/11, no one said, what race are you? I'm not going to help you. Right. And we've divided ourselves. And that's the dangers when you cannot have a reasonable discussion with people. Like, this guy's a pro evolution guy. I'm more pro creation, but we could sit and have a reasonable conversation. Like, why do you believe what you believe? Maybe I learned something from you. And if I say no, that's dangerous, we don't want to hear it all. But if it's dangerous, it's dangerous. But who's the arbiter of truth? Someone who's treated ICU patients and watched people die, or someone who's sat in their office and never saw a patient? That's what I mean. Is like, when we have social media being the truth and saying what's right, we need to say, we trust you enough, college student, to hear both sides, and then you can weigh and say, yeah, this guy's unreasonable, this person's reasonable, she's got a good point, and take points from each other. I have people that I really don't like, but I learned stuff from them still, and it was valuable to me to hear their side, and I go, oh, I understand your worldview is different than mine. That's okay. Like, we can have a reasonable discussion, but when you hate all people or say all police are bad, that's what I'm seeing. And I'm thinking, like you said, put people in a box. No one's really I don't know anyone who is just this or just that, right? They look, and most people who are reasonable, there are unreasonable people, there's no doubt about it. But I think from that, you learn, even the unreasonable people, you learn, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to ever have my mind so made up that I can't hear you and respect you and love you for who you are, right? And we're different, and learning to accept each other and love our idiosyncrasies and all the crazy stuff that we do. All of us have issues, there's no doubt about it. But I think when you say this person's all good, there's nothing bad about it, I was like, well, or they're all bad. I mean, most of us, I don't know anyone that's all good or all bad in general.
When I was in the hospital, I said, did Jesus Christ make this vaccine? And the doctor just kept looking at me. And I said, did Jesus Christ make the vaccine? And I said, okay, since you're not going to answer, I will answer for you. No, he did not. So we know it's not perfect. So let's just move on. Like, let's figure out what the problem is. And I think that, we need to get to this thing. Nothing is perfect here, right? Nothing is perfect. People aren't perfect. We need to get to the point where we're having these honest conversations and acknowledge it. And I'll be honest with you. I voted for Biden. People want to make this political. I voted for Biden. So people are like, she was a Trump supporter. Look at her. She's, anti-vax, and I just, my husband and I laugh, and I was like, so, okay, now that they know I voted for Biden, it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, we don't want to say anything about that now. So it's become it's such an interesting.
Yeah, it's sad that it's political. It's your story. Whatever side of the fence you're on, this is your story. And I think that's really important to people to say, look, I'm not pushing it. And I think this is there's so much out there. I'm telling you, I've learned so much. There's a guy on Twitter that I follow who looks at propaganda and how much of what we see is propaganda on our side or the other side. And I think you have to look and say, this is propaganda on my side. I'm not buying into it. It's propaganda on the other side. I'm not buying it. And I think it's so important for us to be able to, doctors have lost their critical thinking, saying, okay, I'm seeing this, I do this and this happens. Okay, I do this and this, but they said this is going to be good, but it's not good. So at some point I had to step back and say, okay, what am I seeing? Who's having success? I want my patients to do better. And not to be, like you said, not to be arrogant in a way where we say, hey, if I'm not the one to help you, let me send you to the world expert in that area and let them help you, because I don't know what the heck I'm doing in this area, right? That is what we're going to be hit with. Watch, us primary care docs are going to be hit with post-vax problems or post-COVID problems that we just don't know how to deal with yet. And we have to learn, and we have to be able to say, I think steroids are good. I think this medicines, there's certain meds I can't even say or I'll get blackballed. I know that, but there's certain ones you have to look and say, does it help or not? I really, honestly, I've come to the point where I don't really care about what people on Twitter think. I mean, I just thought, would I walk away from it if they blackballed? Yeah, Twitter, just walk away and live my life happily. If I get knocked off YouTube or Twitter or whatever, it's like, I really don't care at this point in my life, because if I can't speak the truth, then it's not a platform I want to be part of. Anything, I don't want to be part of that.
Social media is really great and is really bad, right? Social media connects us. That's how we connected, right? But it has become such a bad tool. People sit behind their computers or their cell phones and they're tweeting or putting things out there, and it's not a person, right? And so I'm a person. I like to have that people connection. That's who I am. And I don't like the whole way that we've gone about life now, that we've become a social media society, and you've lost the patience. You've lost the people when you do that. And that's where we're severely lacking, right? And so I just wish that it would change. I do believe that if more and more of us come together, and I don't care what your political beliefs are, what your religious beliefs are, if more and more of us come together and say, no, we demand change in this area, then we can change things. I mean, for me personally, my faith is very important to us. It's important to me as a person and our family. But again, I'm not going to go and change somebody, right? I can live my life and live by example. And that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to speak the truth. And the truth is what happened to me. And I'm supposed to stand up for others. And do I think that people should get vaccinated? You know, that's their choice. I'm going to tell you what happened to me. I'm going to tell you I got vaccinated. I'm not going to tell you not to get vaccinated. I think you need to look at all the information. I think that we have distrust now because we're not acknowledging this smaller percent of people, right, that are having these reactions. When you don't acknowledge that, then guess what? We have lost all trust in the medical community. And the medical community right now is actually the CDC. And that's where we're getting our quote unquote medical community from, or NIH. And so we have to acknowledge that because they know that things are not perfect. And it's interesting because some of the pharmaceutical companies are now focusing on women's health all of a sudden and what they're doing for women's health. And I'm like, I'm not stupid. I understand what they're doing on their social media accounts is because, you know, I've been very outspoken about this. But again, you know, I take a seizure medication from a pharmaceutical company, right? So that's what keeps me alive. And so I'm not saying pharmaceutical is all bad. So I think we need to go back to balance, and we need to have our balance again. And we need to find that, because if we don't find it, we're going to lose a lot of people in so many different areas by not having balance.
Yeah, and that's a point, we've lost trust, because I know if I got really sick, I know who I'd be calling, and I know who it wouldn't be, right? And so I think it's very important as a personal level. So if I would do that for me, why would I not advocate for my patient that same way? And I think that's an important part of and I love, you know, I just love your take on all this stuff. I'm so blessed to have you on. Really, it's so important that just to be a small, because I know there's a small, tiny little stepping stone for you, and then you step up and you're going to have a national stage to talk about this stuff, really, because reasonable people are reasonable and they want to hear this. They want to hear the truth, whether I like it or not. Like, you don't, in a jury trial, you don't say, well, we're not going to say all the bad stuff this person did because it may hurt your feelings. No, you say, look, here's the bad, here's the good, here's the person. Take what you want from this conversation. I think there's so much. I think we talked about in every, you know, controversial. We didn't talk about sex, but I think we talked about just about everything else. I think, you know, but it's important to have these kind of conversations where we can say, hey, look, I'm not pushing it. And if I am pushing an agenda, call me on it. But here's the problem. I think a big problem is when we look at, say, who's educating our doctors, who's educating us, there's vested interest, and we need to be clear on that. I think people should Google who sponsors the CDC, who sponsors the World Health Organization, who sponsors this company, who sponsors that, and then you look and you step back and say, huh, that's interesting, right? If I'm sponsored by Brandy, I'm going to make her sound really good, because, you know, I don't want to lose her funding. And I think that's what Brandy said too, is with regard to her organization is not taking sponsors. And I'll tell you, you know, I'm just gonna be honest with you straight up. Like, you know, doing low carb MD for all these years, we didn't take a sponsor because we didn't want to at least give the perception that we were biased and what the advice, or not the advice, but the products that we like or people we like and things like that. Because once we take a nickel from them, we're now biased. So on this podcast, I did take a sponsor. Why? Because I believe in the product. Or not on this specific podcast, but in general, I believe in the product, I believe in the person, and they believed in me, right? So it was worth it for me, and I have no conflict of interest in that. The problem is on social media, I will tell you, you know, I've seen attacks, and I thought, that's weird. Why would they attack that topic? 5 people on the same day at the same time. And a friend of mine says, propaganda, they're paid by industry. And he goes, here's where they got paid. And you're like, wow, there's no integrity. And that's what I love about you. It's like, I think what we say is don't compromise your integrity. If you think you may be wrong. And if you do find out you're wrong, stand up and go, yeah, you know, I thought that, but I was wrong. I looked at the evidence and it changed. I respect people. It's not being wishy-washy. It's saying there's new evidence that came in. So I'm telling you, there's a lot of people who are going to be held to account. There's so many things that people have talked about before as being great, and all of a sudden they don't talk about it. They say we don't have enough evidence. You did 2 years ago, giving a talk on vitamin D and immune system. Now all of a sudden you don't have enough evidence. What happened? Did the evidence go away somehow? Right? A ton of new evidence that comes. So I think there's a lot of that where people are going to say, wait, you had information you didn't give me. Just like you, when that happened to you 10 years ago, you say, just give me the evidence. Even though I might have still made the same decision, but at least I would have known. the possibilities and say, okay, I made an informed consent and I went with it. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think that when we remove industry, right? When I say pharmaceutical or medical devices, when we remove that from what we're doing, I think we actually can have a broader reach. And for me, I will tell you honestly, it would be so much easier to take money from pharmaceutical companies to grow my nonprofit, right? So to grow that, it would be, there's so many things that we could do for women and girls. I could tell you so much stuff, but at what cost, right? So the cost is, sell your soul now and get this, but really, did I help anybody? No. So I think that even with whatever this evolves to of women demanding change, or because that's kind of one of the things I keep talking about is that women demand change. And what does that look like? I don't know, but I know, and I hope that if ever tempted to take money from pharmaceuticals, somebody would call me out and say, remember way back when you said you were totally not going to take it, Brandy. I did tell my husband, I'm like, I would love for them to just say, oh yeah, we'll give you X amount of dollars, just so I can say, see, this is what they wanted to give me to shut me up, right?
Well, it'd be nice if enough people said, look, I agree with what you're doing. Let me help out that cause. Let me send you $10, $20, 100, whatever you can do, right? And I think that's the same thing, because I know tons of people listen to this podcast and are blessed by it, but they never think, yeah, maybe I'll give $5 or $8 or $2 or one. You just don't think that way. And so, because it's free and you go, okay, I'll just get, or someone else is doing all the hard work. And I think when people like you say, look, help me stay away from industry, that's a huge, and we had sponsors on Low Carb MD that helped us like pay most of the bills. But it's one of those things you want to get the message on. And it's a hard thing. I had to, on this podcast series, Life's Best Medicine, I said, okay, look, I can only afford to get so many episodes out. If I have a sponsor, then I can afford to get 3 times as many episodes. This is critical, right? So I could pay for your episode because other people are helping with other episodes, right? So I think it's if we believe strongly in something, you put your money where your mouth is, and you stand up and you do the right thing and say, oh, it should be that way. Like we all do that. Like when I was chief resident, the resident would complain about the call schedule. I go, okay, here's the call schedule. Figure it out. Let me know, and we'll do it. If you have a better solution, then all of a sudden the problem was gone. They didn't care anymore because it was work. You don't realize you have all these moving pieces, and you're trying to change the whole thing. Okay, here you go. Good luck. It's going to be at work. There's been a lot of thought put into this, and I think we're very good at complaining and not saying how do we change the system. So, yeah, you have an alternative.
It's interesting that you say that, because so many women, we talk about how many women go to the doctors and are not being listened to, or the hospital, or so many different things. Either they're tired of this medication or this and that. And I'm like, okay, well then when is enough for you, right? Because the next generation will be saying the same thing in 20 years from now. So there has to be a time that we say enough is enough. And I think that one of the things I would encourage everyone that's listening is that before you make a donation to any nonprofit, especially in the medical field, that's helping a cause that's medical, before you do that, you need to call and make sure that they do not take any pharmaceutical money. And that would be an interesting thing for people to be really eye-opening for them to see. And they may not publicize it on their website, but you would be surprised how many nonprofits take money from pharmaceutical companies. And so
other nonprofits that are sponsored.
Yeah,
I've learned a lot in the last year, and I'm telling you, when you look and go, oh, why are they taking such a strong stance here? Oh, okay, now I see why. So it's a sad thing, and maybe there is nothing to it, but when you see it, you go, gosh darn it, that's just and I'll tell you the other thing, and I would tell people too, is nonprofits, look into them, look how they're spending their money, look at their finances, because I'm telling you, I've seen nonprofits, and I'm involved in the Merlot Foundation, as people know, and every single dime goes to helping people. It doesn't go to flying first class, and I have to pay my own way and all that kind of stuff because I don't want to use that money. So I think there's places like that where it's used for the appropriate thing, because you want to help people, and like 90% of it goes to someone having a new yacht. It's like, well, I don't think that's a very good investment of my, I really, and so don't just give money to make yourself feel better. Look at the organization and make sure you're going to make a difference, and that's going to get to that person who needs it. That's the problem.
And I think a lot of times we think of larger nonprofits, right? We think of the larger things. You actually need to see the people that are in the community doing something, right? That's the ones that you need to go in and give to. And so I think that, yeah, when you're looking at things, be mindful of where you're giving your money to. And also, if you're complaining about healthcare and what's going on in the healthcare system, what are you actively doing to change it? And so make sure that you're involved, be proactive, have conversations, and actually do something, not just sit there and talk about it, but what are you doing? Kind of goes back to the CDC. The CDC keeps talking about when more women are impacted. We know across the board on lots of different things, but what are we doing about that? Nothing. We're just saying it. Well, that's great that you've said it. I mean, one of the conversations I had with one of the doctors is I said, you know what? They had the doctor and a bunch of residents in the room. I said, if this was causing erectile dysfunction, you guys would have fixed this like yesterday. And the resident started laughing and the doctor looks back like, shut up, And so it's true. I mean, we need to have these conversations. This is not about political issues. This is about healthcare for women in healthcare. We need to, and I'm just going to be honest, you can probably, if you want to cut this, you can cut it. Women's health is not just about abortion. Okay. And so we need to get off of just women's health and abortion. We need to move beyond that. We need to have the conversation on a larger scale.
Oh man, you're gonna aim in for me, and I think that's a huge thing. It's like, of course, I'm not going to censor you when we're talking about censorship, right? So I think it's really important to get those messages out and really say, look, here's what we stand for. Here's what we're trying to accomplish, and being straight up with people, because so many people have a hidden agenda. Just have your real agenda. Say, this is what we want to do, right? If I want to brainwash your kids, I'm gonna say, hey, I'm trying to brainwash your kids because I think this is a better way, right? Whatever. Be honest, and if you believe your stuff's not crazy, then say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's my agenda, right? So hopefully this conversation, I know we went long, but Brandy, it's such an honor to have you, and I'm going to force this out as quickly as possible because I think it's so important for people to objectively say, and people are not going to listen to it, and they're going to pass judgment. That's what happens. They don't listen, and they go, "That's not what we said." Listen to the story, listen it back, because people go back and listen to what we talked about. There's a ton of wisdom here, a ton of information. I think this is so important, this topic, and so all these topics, because we raised a lot of issues, and that's kind of what we're here for. We want to be a little bit of a fly in the ointment. I don't want to be a fly in your eye or anything, but just hopefully we can plant some seeds and you think and go, okay. And I think the big thing, and what's troubled me, is we've relied on other people to do the research for us, and we trusted what they're saying. And if I have a pastor who says something, let me look at the Bible and see if that lines up with what the Bible says. Or if I, have a professor say, because I'll tell you what, in medicine, I'll tell you how much stuff I've told people that was wrong because that's what everyone said was right. And I look back and say, there's no data on that. Why are we saying that? There's no data. So I think these are the things we have to look at and say, look, ultimately, you're your own advocate. Ultimately, you have to look at the data and say, okay, these two are crazy. I'm not going to listen to them. Or you say, hey, they're right. Go look at the data. Go look at the data on certain drugs used in Mexico and in India and see what they did. And then you say, is it a huge coincidence, or is there a possibility there's something here? You look at your friends who may have had problems after a vaccination and say, is there something to that, or was that just bad luck, right? At some point, you have to assess that, and you have to look and say, ultimately, I think peer pressure, bullying, all those things are not what we need. We need you to sit back and say, okay, is it in my best interest to get this for me, for society, for life? And then make an educated decision on that. But my job is to give you both sides of the coin and to understand, and then you can make an educated decision.
Patients, from a patient perspective, patients need to start demanding patient-centered care and patient-centered research. And that is on the horizon and has been growing. But as a patient, you need to know that when you look at stuff, is it patient-centered care and is it patient-centered research? If not, you need to call some people on that, because there's a problem. And that's one of the things that I'm having a really hard time right now with the CDC is this patient-centered research? If it is, then all the information gets out there, and that is patient-centered. And so I am a part of a organization. I won't say the name, but I'm part of an organization that's what we do, is patient-centered research.
Yeah, tell people how to find you too.
So you can look up LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. My Instagram personal one is closed, but Twitter probably would be the most social media. And I'm on LinkedIn, and you can go and see our nonprofit is myepilepsystory.org. Read a little bit about us, what we're doing, and I think I'm going to be doing some stuff with Women Demand Change, so be on the lookout. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. It may take me a little bit of time, but I'm going to be getting a group of people, doctors, together to really talk about demanding change in the healthcare institution for women. So on a larger scale.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I think you have a platform for a reason. So I'm glad to give you a tiny one here. And so since this is called Life's Best Medicine, what do you think is life's best medicine? What do you think are some lessons you've learned or things that going through what you went through that you really would want to tell your kids or tell someone who's listening who's struggling right now?
I would tell you kind of like my son. I think that when I heard my son, and I saw him put his arm around his sister, is that God does have a purpose and plan, and we don't see it. And to see my children see that at such a young age, it was overwhelming to watch that. Just emotionally, I just felt so horrible. And then my husband and I talked about it, and we're like, we are teaching them the right thing, right? We are instilling these values in them. So I would tell you that as you're going through this hard time, no one can understand you like God can. And so that is the biggest thing, is that, for us, our faith is so important and is the core of who we are. And so when you have that, I really, truly believe that that will get you through. And I'm not going to tell you it's going to be easy. There's been so many things. Obviously, when I look at what's happened with my son, I see it, and I see him struggle. And what will his life be like long term? But I know, again, that there's a bigger picture and purpose. And I may not see that right now, but one day I will. And we did a video actually called Mosaic. And you can look at that on the website. But the Mosaic video talks about what is the biggest picture and perfect picture, and what's our plan. And so there is a plan, and just hold true to that. If you need help, I would also say, reach out to people, have conversations, find people that you can trust. I think that we have become a social media society, and we need to step away from that in some aspects. I mean, I'm so glad that we connected, obviously, over social media, but we need to step away from that, because we've lost personal connections with people, and we've got to get back to that. We've got to get back to that. That will help us. In healthcare, that will help us just in our lives, everyday lives. So I would encourage you to, really pray and in search for what God wants for you in your life. And I'm not going to tell you it's going to be easy, because it's definitely not all the time.
Man, that is awesome. I've gotten goosebumps more talking to you than I have in a long time, because I think it's so important what you're saying. And I think the wisdom and going through what you went through. And I think for me, when I talked about faith, people prove it to me. I'm like, I can't really prove it. It's just what it is. Like, you had to, at that point when you can't walk and you don't know what's going to happen, and you've been an advocate. And people, I want to make this important point, is that Brandy's an advocate for people. And she's an advocate for herself, and she has to be stubborn and keeps posting stuff, and it gets taken down. Posting gets taken down. Can you imagine how that feels? Can you imagine how that feels when you want to help people and you want to get your story to help people, but there's people who are judging and say, "Hey, this is not true. This is not right. This you're pushing the agenda." It's like, look, listen to the story. And I think any censors out there, if you want to censor this, I think you have to look at your own soul and say, "Is this something I don't want to get?" And then you have to ask yourself why. Why do I not want certain information out? Why would I not want to help my fellow man? Right. And I think that's really important. And to step back and look at that and say, why? What's Brian's agenda? Why is he talking about this stuff? Right. And I think all of us have that responsibility. So to everyone listening, thank you for your continued support. And thank you for listening. I think this is the most important episode of anything I've ever done, really, because these things have to be talked about, and we have to be better as a society. We have to give each other the benefit of the doubt. We have to love each other and say, okay, I may not agree with them, but I'm not going to attack them personally. And I think, being kind to yourself, being kind to others, as I always say, I think that's really important. I think all of us need to step back, take a breath, and say, let me reassess, let me look at the data, and let me be my own advocate, right? You have a powerful woman here who's an advocate for other people, and she had to be an advocate for herself. And I'll tell you, as a physician, the worst place a physician can be is in the hospital, because we're helpless there, because we get sick just like everyone else when we have depression, anxiety, alcohol abuse, and all these things. So docs listening, if you need help, get help, and if you're not being effective, be effective. And if you need to make changes because you're miserable, make changes because you're miserable, right? Let that misery force, because I know a lot of you and you're friends of mine, and I feel terrible about what you're going through. And the reason I feel terrible is because I was there for 18 years, busting my butt, 14, 16 hours, sacrificing my family, sacrificing spending time with my kids, and not having time to do podcasts like this. And this, how many people can we reach you in this, rather than spending, an extra 5 hours a day dealing with insurance companies and arguing with them. And I hope that from this, people say, look, these are reasonable people who are saying, look, is pharma all bad or all good? No, it's not. And I think I've given pharma more negative publicity because I do take pleasure in taking people off meds. That's one of my big joys in life. Every time I smile right? As Dr. Unwin says, the angels sing when I take someone off of medicine, and we need more singing. We need more laughter, and we need more human connection. And what Brandy's saying about social media, that's been on my heart too. It's like we could sit there and spend hours there and ignore our kids who need us to go throw the ball outside, And so I hope this is a thing to help you reassess what you believe, faith, belief, yoga, whatever your thing is, find your peace. I'm telling you, as a doctor, it is a massively important topic. Is find your peace. What gives you joy? How can you help your neighbor? How can you be kind and decent? Not from a religious standpoint, but just as a human being standpoint, right? If your religion helps you with that, cool. If your philosophy is of hating people and separating people, you need to find a new philosophy. So hopefully this episode makes people think. It will make me think for a long time. Hopefully I can sleep again now, Brandy. You've messed up my sleep for the last week because I was so many emotions going on with this stuff. So thank you, and I'm really looking forward to your journey.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I'm sure I'll be calling you to.
Yeah, we'll be talking for sure if they let us. All right. All right, everyone. Have a great week. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. I wanted to let you know about an upcoming conference that really had a huge impact on me. That's helped me on my journey and helped me to really understand metabolic health and what we're doing to make people healthier. And so I have my friend Doug Reynolds, who's the boss, who's putting on this conference. So Doug, tell us about the conferences coming up, Low Carb USA, San Diego. I love it because it's right next to my house and I get to sleep in my own bed and come, but maybe I get to stay in a hotel this time. I don't know. And I get to speak. So man, it's awesome that we get to all meet up together and build community. We all know how important that is. So Doug, welcome. Tell people about what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Brian. It's really exciting to be able to do it in person again. I think there's so many people out there that are just clamoring to be able to talk to people again and give someone a hug and just collaborate like has become so predominant in all the other events that we've done before this COVID thing hit. One of the things that's come up since when COVID hit, we couldn't do it. So then we flipped over and did virtual versions of the San Diego event and the Boca one. And we had a lot of people actually sign up and become a part of that. And so what it has done for us now is make us understand that the live stream component can be very effective for people that can't make it to the event. So this is a proper live event, and I think I want to make this very clear to people that I think they think it's like so many people have asked how many of the talks are going to be virtual and how many are going to be in person, and the answer is every single one is going to be in person. So we will have a live stream component. People will be able to access it via live stream, but all the speakers will be there in person. Anybody that hasn't been able to make it obviously just hasn't made it into the lineup. And I think that's really important, and it's really exciting that we've got all of these people coming out, and some really good names. Gary Taubes has been a stalwart with us. He's like always supported us. The first guy to say, let's do this. You obviously, Rob Sivers, Tro, Tony Hampton, Brett Scher, Dr. Ben, Amy Berger, Diana Rogers. I'm really excited that she's, on the sustainability side. I'm really excited that she's able to make it this time. We've been trying to get her to an event of ours for a while. This is the first time. Andrea Salcido is a really, really amazing. She did one of the Grand Rounds talks for our SMHP, and she's a gynecologist. We've had a lot of comments from people from the feedback forms and stuff saying that you should get a gynecologist in. So now we have. Michelle Hearn was a potentially Olympic athlete who just like crashed and burned on carbs, and she's a dietitian, and she found keto and eventually basically carnivore, and it's cured her to the extent where she's training for the Olympics again. But she wrote this book called Dietitian's Dilemma, because everything that she'd learned as a dietitian she wasn't doing anymore in order to make herself healthy again. And so it's really cool to have a real dietitian's perspective of the problems that they have. She's basically left that vocation because she just couldn't function in the hospital environment and that where she was. she was not allowed to speak to people about low carb. And so that's a fascinating story. Dr. Gurpreet Pada, I think you might have even had him on.
Yeah, he's doing amazing stuff with pain management.
He's just one of the most incredible people.
It's amazing.
Marco Cazella is, I don't think,
he's a legend.
At least in this one.
Yeah, he's a legend. I worked with him in deprescribing the textbook chapter, and he's phenomenal. And he's struggled with metabolic disease, even though he's a long distance runner, and he was able to get soda out of the hospitals he's affiliated with, and that's a huge task.
Yeah,
that's a huge money maker. So yeah, so many great people, and I think the big thing is just being able to sit down. I know. For me, being at Low Carb USA, the first time I was able to sit down and have a cup of coffee with some great leaders that were just there, and they just are there to talk. And so there's so much great information. Anyone else we need to talk about, Doug?
Well, Steve Finney is the latest addition to the lineup. I've been chatting with him for a while now, managed to get him on board. Dave Feldman as well. He wasn't sure if he was going to be able to talk because of this research that he's got going on, that he might not have been able to actually speak in public. Arthur Agatston, I think, is going to be fascinating. I did a podcast interview with him the other day. I didn't even know until very recently, but he's the guy that discovered or defined the calcium score. It's actually known as
his name.
Yeah.
And the South Beach diet. He's done so much work. I mean, he's always trying to make people healthy. He's doing a lot. Yeah. So yeah, it's just great the amount of talent you pulled in.
And we've got amazing. The whole, for those people that know about the SMHP, which is kind of the other hat that I put on, the other organization that I run, that nonprofit, pretty much the entire board of directors for that is going to be at this event, either speaking or at least present. And then, the other committees, we've got the panel of advisors for the clinical guidelines. You're on that panel. It's just, there are so many, it's just going to be so many fascinating conversations that are going to go on over that weekend. I can't wait.
Yeah, and it's just, and you're also bringing a lot of vendors, like Keto Mojo is always there, and a lot of good people. Yeah. And so try different products, and there's some great Restore program who's doing some great work through your program and really getting it out to the masses. There's so many great people coming out, so I would highly recommend it. And I worked out a deal with Doug because I want people that, sometimes finance is a issue for people. So I said, Doug, look, my people need a discount, our people need a discount, so what do you work out for us, Doug?
So yeah, we've got it. If you use the code low carb MD, it gives you 20% off and it's not just the ticket. For those people that sign up for the dinners, for those people that require a CME certificate, whatever they add, whatever their purchase is, the total amount, that 20% comes off that total. In the past, when we gave discounts, it came just off the ticket price. But it's not that great a guy. It's actually just that it's easier for me to manage. To take it off the total, but yeah, as a result, everyone else scores, right? So
that helps too. And then is that for people who come in person and online also?
Correct. Yeah. Right. So whatever is in your cart, basically, that discount comes off the total. And the other thing is, one of the options in the upgrade options. So if you only buy the ticket now, you can upgrade and buy the VIP dinners later if you want to join us. Or you can, if you signed up for the live stream and you wanted to upgrade to in person, because now you realize, hey, everybody's traveling and actually I think I can do this. Then you can still use that code on your upgrade options as well. So you can still get 20% off. If you decide later. So if you buy the live stream and later, in beginning of August, you decide you want to actually come in person, you can utilize that code again then for the upgrades, and they'll apply, which doesn't happen for anybody else. So.
And what are the dates?
26th to 29th of August.
Awesome. And it'll be live. And if you want to stay in your hotel, I think, can you live stream it from your computer wherever you're at?
Yeah, so that's the thing, is it didn't used to be like that either, but I think every time we do this, we improve it. So now somebody that's in person has access to the live stream as well. So if they want to watch part of it, in their room or something, they can. We would really prefer that they come down and sit in the audience. But if for some reason that's not possible, they can watch it, or they miss something, they can go and watch. They can go back and watch that evening or something. They can watch a talk that they missed or something like that. And then they get access. They get access to those recordings after the event, and then within about 2 weeks, we normally are able to get all the individual videos of the talks populated on that site as well, and they have access to that forever. So
yeah, it's great education. I think being able to, because even being there, I've had times where I want to interview someone or to spend time with someone because they're coming from South Africa or something, and I miss a talk, and I was like, oh shoot, I want to see that one. And so it really does free you up to say, okay, I'll hybrid. You can sit and go down. You can talk to people. You can watch it later that night or on the weekend, because a lot of us are really busy. So that is outstanding. I'm really glad. That's a huge improvement for sure. And and some of those talks you're going to want to watch it a couple of times to make sure you absorb it all, so you don't have to feel like you have to take notes. And Doug hates people taking pictures in the meetings because it's distracting for people behind them. So you'll have access to the talk, the PowerPoints and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's really huge. So hey everyone, thank you. I think this is a huge thing. The reason I had Doug on, we have no financial interests. It's really just because I know the benefit of this and how it can help people trying to live a better life and getting on track. And I know it helped me immensely and changed the course of my life, really. So Doug, thanks for all you're doing and continue to do. And you're making a massive impact. So Low Carb USA San Diego, I would highly recommend everyone come out.
Appreciate that, Brian. And thank you for what you're doing. I mean, it all started at one of our meetings many years ago, but I'm so glad that you made it to that meeting, because you're doing great things now too. Thank you.
Hey, I get some good South African food out of it sometimes, so it's all good. So hey everyone, hey, thank you for listening and thank you for your continued support. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.